He's an Arizonan through and through, spent his entire life in the Grand Canyon State. Bob Lehman was born and raised in Phoenix, and he admired his big brother Mike, who was 5 years older. Mike had been away at college the past few years until a brief stay at home in early 1969 when Mike was anticipating an assignment to Vietnam.
He was actually inducted into the service after college, decided to go into the Air Force, and the day before induction is when I came home and I found him. I was the guy who found him.
Having completed another routine day of high school his senior year, Bob walked into his house to search the cupboards for that traditional post-school snack, but instead, he found the body of his brother, who hours earlier had committed suicide.
I remember going next door and in a panic, and what do we do, and calling my mom, and it was just a horrific thing. It all happened back February 10th, 1969. So it was one of these things that kind of set the course for my life as I, years later, processed through that event. I recognized that, nobody even asked me about it. Nobody. The only person who ever asked me any details was the detective on the day that it happened. My mom didn't, my stepdad, my dad, my friends. And after 4 days, I go back to my high school, and I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. People would know that my brother had killed himself, and so it was a boatload of things to really deal with. And more than that, it was my gun that he used.
Young Bob Lehman did what so many innocents of a tragedy do, took on blame that he need not have shouldered.
Kind of think through, cycle back all the things that I probably could have said, should have said, ought to have said, and really none of those things going forward really make that much of a difference, because from what I understand, people who are in that situation would probably do all they could to follow through, whether they had my gun, my situation, my family, and so on. But no, he never really talked about it. I really was not aware. In fact, nobody in our family was. So it was really a surprise, a horrific surprise.
That type of personal shock, there remains no absolute remedy. The short and long-term effects on survivors are incalculable.
When you have that kind of traumatic thing that happens to you, looking back, you can either put too much weight on that or not enough weight on it. There are many people who put too much weight on things that happened in the past. This is my feeling. And because of that, they never get out of it their whole life. But there are other people like me that had things happen to them or they were involved with, and they didn't put enough weight on them, and they didn't process those. So really, all the way back to my senior year in high school when that happened, probably began the whole process of anxiety, and which led to depression.
He was in his mid-20s when he officially became Pastor Bob Lehman, a man who took a huge bite from the apple of success. A master's degree in divinity, chaplain to police and professional sports teams, a college professor of theology, founder of the Arizona Hills Community Church in Anthem, Arizona. Pastor Bob, as he's known to his friends and congregation, has lived an exemplary life serving others, helping others feel the pleasure of community and the pleasure of Christ. Yet he himself lives with clinical depression.
Now, for me, there was kind of a chemical issue, a brain chemistry thing. And so I started on some medication that was not anything extra. It's just some of the same things that your brain already produces, oxytocin and norepinephrine and serotonin. And then I'm committed to Christ as a Christian and as a pastor. And I found that my relationship to Christ and growing deep in that has really given me just the balance in my life, kind of the way God created me to be. And I do that not because I'm pulling out the pastor card. That's the reality. The reality is I believe that we're made in a certain fashion, a certain way, and I think you need to know yourself and know who you are and know who God made you to be, and then function accordingly.
And to function accordingly, Pastor Bob had another critical step to take. He knew he had to share his personal diagnosis with his followers, a flock that considered him an indestructible servant of Christ. Pastor Bob had to look them in the eye and tell them he does serve Christ, but is a mere mortal who suffers from a disorder that infects the dense intricacies of the brain.
It was very difficult for me to get on stage and tell an entire congregation, 2 different services, hey, I want to take the same advice that I've been giving out for a lot of years. If you're in trouble as a parent, get help. If you're in trouble in your marriage, get help. And if you're in trouble in how you're thinking about who you are and depression and so on, get help. The vast majority of people would say, what are you talking about? I mean, you just seem so happy and so on. But the reality is this is an insidious kind of disease that will really take over all the mental functions that you're doing. And you may function pretty well on the outside, but eventually something tends to break. And if you're not wise and you don't get the necessary help and therapy, you can really get yourself into deep weeds. I recognize that I'm still in process, I'm still learning, I'm still growing as a human being and a person.
Pastor Bob has been married to his college sweetheart, Janet, for 43 years.
Frankly, we're still on our honeymoon.
Bob and Janet raised 4 successful children and now have 13 grandchildren. Early life tragedy and depression disorder has not knocked him out. In fact, it seems the disorder has chosen an Anthem pastor as spokesman of how to manage it while prospering and serving others.
There are people around the world that would look back to things that I've had the privilege of saying to them, and they'd say, man, that made a difference in my life. True success are those things that you think about if you're on your deathbed. You know, how well you passed the baton to your family, how well you made a difference in your community, how well you made a difference in other people's lives. And I've had to come to realize that that's what real success is. I would say build into relationships, find out about people. You may uncover somebody who's been waiting to tell somebody their story, and you may be the very person that can really unlock success and life and joy and fun again.